February 23, 2000, the Staples Center in Los Angeles. 15,000 people dressed in their finest evening wear, packed into one of the most prestigious venues in the world for the 42nd Annual Grammy Awards. This was music's biggest night, where legends were celebrated and careers were defined. Whitney Houston was scheduled to perform and possibly accept an award for Best Female R&B Vocal Performance for her comeback single, "It's Not Right But It's Okay." But what nobody in that arena knew was that backstage, in a private dressing room, a battle was unfolding between two people who had been inseparable for 17 years. Whitney Houston, the voice of a generation, and Clive Davis, the man who had discovered her, shaped her, and turned her into the biggest-selling female artist of all time. The argument wasn't about music or performance or contracts. It was about something far more personal and far more dangerous. Whitney wanted to give a speech that would reveal her truth to the world, and Clive was literally begging her not to do it. What happened when Whitney walked onto that Grammy stage defied everything Clive had taught her about image control and public relations. Her unscripted words left 15,000 people in stunned silence, then tears. And the choice she made that night shattered a 20-year relationship that had survived every storm, every scandal, and every headline. This isn't just a story about a Grammy speech. It's about the moment when America's princess chose authenticity over perfection, humanity over image, and lost the man she called her second father because of it. If you want to discover the hidden moments that reveal who Whitney Houston really was behind the smile and the sequins, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because this story will show you the cost of choosing to be real in a world that demands you be perfect. To understand what happened at the 2000 Grammys, you have to understand the relationship between Whitney Houston and Clive Davis. It wasn't just business, it was family. Clive had discovered Whitney in 1983 when she was just 19 years old, singing background vocals at a New York nightclub where her mother, Cissy Houston, was performing. The moment he heard her voice, Clive knew he was witnessing something that only came along once in a generation. He signed her to Arista Records and spent the next 2 years carefully crafting every detail of her debut. He selected the songs, chose the producers, designed the image, and controlled the narrative. When Whitney Houston's self-titled debut album was released in 1985, it became the biggest-selling debut album by a female artist in history. 7 consecutive #1 singles followed: Grammy Awards, American Music Awards, Billboard records that still stand today. But the relationship between Whitney and Clive was never just about the music. Clive became the father figure that Whitney felt she needed in the brutal entertainment industry. He protected her, guided her, and made decisions that he believed were in her best interest. And for years, Whitney trusted him completely. She even put a clause in her contract stating that if Clive ever left Arista Records, she could leave too. That's how much she believed in him. But by 1999, something had changed. Whitney's marriage to Bobby Brown, which had begun in 1992, had become a public disaster. Tabloids documented every fight, every arrest, every sign of the drug use that was destroying her from the inside. Whitney's pristine image, the one Clive had so carefully constructed, was crumbling. And worse, her voice was beginning to suffer. The crystal-clear high notes that had defined her career were becoming strained and unreliable. Clive had watched this deterioration with growing frustration and heartbreak. He had tried everything to save her: private interventions, threatening to drop her from the label, begging her to leave Bobby, but Whitney wouldn't listen. And by 1999, when she was nominated for a Grammy for "It's Not Right But It's Okay," Clive saw an opportunity. This could be Whitney's comeback moment, a chance to remind the world of her talent and begin rebuilding the image that drugs and Bobby Brown had destroyed. But to do that, Whitney needed to follow the script: accept the award graciously, thank the right people, perform beautifully, and absolutely do not address the rumors, the scandals, or Bobby Brown. The day before the Grammys, Clive met with Whitney at the Beverly Hilton to go over the plan for the evening. Whitney seemed distracted and distant during their meeting. When Clive asked her what was wrong, she finally spoke the words that would change everything between them. "Clive, I want to tell the truth tomorrow night. If I win, I want to talk about my marriage. about my struggles, about being human. Clive felt his stomach drop. Whitney, that's not a good idea. The Grammys aren't the place for that kind of honesty. You need to focus on your music, not your personal problems. But Whitney's eyes flashed with something Clive hadn't seen before: defiance. That's exactly the problem, Clive. For 17 years I've been who you wanted me to be, America's sweetheart. The girl next door with the perfect voice and the perfect smile. But that's not who I am. I'm struggling, I'm hurting, and I'm tired of pretending. Their conversation lasted 3 hours. Clive used every argument he had. He talked about her career, her legacy, her young daughter Bobby Christina, who needed her mother's image protected. He reminded her of all the people who depended on her, the jobs that relied on her success. And finally, he made it personal. Whitney, I love you like a daughter. Everything I've ever done has been to protect you and help you succeed. If you give this speech, you're going to destroy everything we've built together. The media will tear you apart. Your career might never recover, and I won't be able to fix it. Whitney was quiet for a long time. Then she looked at Clive with tears in her eyes and said something that broke his heart. Maybe I don't want you to fix it anymore, Clive. Maybe I need to be broken so I can figure out how to put myself back together. That night, Clive went back to his hotel room believing he had failed to convince her, but he wasn't ready to give up. He would try again tomorrow, right before the show. He had to, because if Whitney gave that speech, it wouldn't just damage her career. It would prove that he had failed to protect her from herself. February 23, 2000. The energy backstage at the Staples Center was electric. Artists moved between dressing rooms, stylists made last-minute adjustments, and producers ran through final technical checks. Whitney Houston arrived at the venue at 4:00 p.m., 3 hours before the live broadcast would begin. She was wearing a stunning white gown that sparkled under the backstage lights, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. To anyone watching, she looked like the Whitney Houston they remembered from her glory days. But Clive Davis, who had been waiting for her arrival, could see the truth in her eyes. She was nervous, and she was determined. Clive followed Whitney to her dressing room, waving away her assistants and closing the door behind them. "Whitney, we need to talk about tonight." Whitney didn't turn around. She continued looking at herself in the mirror, adjusting her hair even though it was already perfect. "Clive, I know what you're going to say, and my answer is still the same." Clive walked closer, his voice gentle but urgent. "Please, Whitney, just listen to me one more time. I know you're in pain. I know you're struggling. But the Grammy stage isn't the place to expose that pain. Think about what the media will do. Think about how they'll twist your words." Whitney finally turned to face him, and Clive was struck by how tired she looked despite the perfect makeup. "Clive, I've been thinking about Bobby, about our marriage, about what people say about us. And you know what I realized? They're right. Our relationship is toxic. The drugs are real. The fights are real. And I'm losing myself trying to defend something that's indefensible." Clive felt a surge of hope. Maybe this wasn't about the speech anymore. Maybe this was Whitney finally ready to make real changes. "Then leave him, Whitney. File for divorce. Get help. But do it privately with dignity. Not on national television in front of 15,000 people." Whitney shook her head, and Clive saw tears forming in her eyes. "That's the problem, Clive. You've taught me to do everything with dignity, with image control, with perfection. And look where it's gotten me. I'm dying inside, Clive. I'm suffocating under this perfect image. And if I don't break free tonight, I never will." What happened next surprised both of them. Clive Davis, the legendary music executive who had shepherded the careers of Janis Joplin, Bruce Springsteen, and countless others, dropped to his knees in front of Whitney Houston. Tears were streaming down his face. "Whitney, please, I'm begging you. Don't do this. Not like this." Whitney looked down at this man who had been her mentor, her protector, her second father for 17 years, and something inside her broke. "Clive, I love you. You've given me everything, but I can't keep being the person you created. I have to find out who I really am underneath all of this." Clive stood up slowly, his composure shattered. "If you give this speech, Whitney, I don't know if I can protect you anymore. I don't know if our relationship can survive this." Whitney reached out and touched his face gently. "Then maybe it's not supposed to survive, Clive. Maybe we both need to let go." There was a knock on the door. Whitney's assistant called out that she was needed for a sound check in 15 minutes. Clive wiped his eyes and straightened his jacket, trying to regain some dignity. "So this is it. You're really going to do this?" Whitney nodded. "I am. And Clive, I need you to be okay with it, because even if you don't understand, I need to know that somewhere deep down you believe I'm doing the right thing." Clive looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke words that would haunt both of them for years. "I don't believe you're doing the right thing, Whitney. I think you're making the biggest mistake of your career. But you're right about one thing. You're not the girl I discovered anymore. I don't know who you are." He walked to the door, then turned back one final time. "I'll be watching from backstage. And when the media destroys you for this, when your career crashes because of this moment of honesty you think you need so badly, I want you to remember that I tried to stop you." The door closed behind him, and Whitney was alone. She looked at herself in the mirror and wondered if Clive was right. Was she about to make the biggest mistake of her life? Or was she about to finally set herself free? In 2 hours, 15,000 people and millions watching at home would have their answer. The 42nd Annual Grammy Awards were in full swing. Performances from the night's biggest stars had kept the audience energized and engaged. When the moment came for the Best Female R&B Vocal Performance category, the tension in the Staples Center was palpable. Everyone knew Whitney Houston was nominated. Everyone had seen the tabloid headlines about her struggles, and everyone was curious to see if she still had the magic that had made her the voice of a generation. Busta Rhymes, Jamie Foxx, and actress Jane Krakowski took the stage to present the award. They opened the envelope and Jamie Foxx's face broke into a huge smile. "And the Grammy goes to Whitney Houston. It's not right, but it's okay." The Staples Center erupted in applause. Cameras found Whitney in the audience, and she stood up, her white gown shimmering under the lights. She looked stunning, poised, every inch the superstar. But as she made her way to the stage, those who knew her well could see something different in her eyes. This wasn't the confident Whitney Houston who had dominated the Grammys in the 1980s and early 1990s. This was someone carrying the weight of a decision that could change everything. Backstage, Clive Davis stood with his arms crossed, watching on a monitor. His face was unreadable, but his hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He was praying that Whitney would come to her senses at the last moment, that she would give the standard acceptance speech, thank the right people, and sit back down without destroying everything they had built. Whitney reached the stage and accepted the Grammy trophy from Jamie Foxx. She stood at the microphone looking out at 15,000 faces, all waiting to hear what she would say. For a long moment she said nothing. The silence stretched out, becoming uncomfortable. People began to shift in their seats. Then Whitney spoke, her voice clear but trembling slightly. "Wow, thank you. Thank you so much to the Recording Academy." She paused, looking down at the Grammy in her hands. Clive exhaled slightly. Maybe she was going to stick to the script after all. But then Whitney looked up, directly into the main camera, and what came out of her mouth next shocked everyone in the building. "I want to thank my family, my mother Sissy who taught me to sing, my daughter Bobby Christina who I love more than life itself, and I want to thank my husband Bobby Brown." The audience applauded politely as they always did when spouses were mentioned, but Whitney wasn't finished. "Bobby and I have been together for 8 years now, and in that time the media has called our relationship every name you can imagine: toxic, destructive, a disaster. And you know what? They're not wrong." You could have heard a pin drop in the Staples Center. 15,000 people froze. Cameras zoomed in on Whitney's face. Backstage, Clive Davis felt his heart sink. She was really doing it. She was really throwing it all away. Whitney's voice grew stronger, more emotional. "My marriage is a mess. I'm not going to stand here and pretend it isn't. We fight. We hurt each other. And yes, we've both made terrible choices that have damaged us and the people we love. But here's what the media doesn't tell you. Here's what nobody wants to talk about. I'm a human being. I'm not America's princess. I'm not a perfect role model. I'm a woman who makes mistakes, who struggles, who sometimes can't live up to the image that everyone expects me to maintain." There were tears streaming down Whitney's face now, but she didn't wipe them away. "For 17 years, I've been the person everyone wanted me to be. I wore the right clothes, said the right things, smiled for the cameras, and pretended that everything was perfect. But it's not perfect. I'm not perfect. And I'm tired of pretending." The camera cut to the audience and people were openly crying. Some were shocked, some were confused, but most were witnessing something they had never seen before. Raw, unfiltered honesty from one of the biggest stars in the world. "I don't know if my marriage will survive," Whitney continued, her voice breaking. "I don't know if my career will survive after tonight, but I know that I can't survive one more day lying about who I really am and what I'm really going through." She looked directly at the camera again, and it felt like she was looking into the soul of everyone watching. If you're out there struggling, if you're pretending to be okay when you're falling apart, if you're terrified of showing the world your real self because you're afraid they won't love you anymore, I want you to know something. You're not alone. I see you. I am you. And it's okay to not be okay. Whitney held up her Grammy. "This trophy is beautiful, but it's also a reminder of the prison I've been living in. The prison of perfection, the prison of image, and tonight I'm choosing to break free." She set the Grammy down on the podium, and the gesture was so powerful that several people in the audience gasped. "I'm not giving this back," she said with the hint of a smile through her tears. "I earned this, but I'm also not going to let it define me anymore." Whitney took a deep breath and delivered her final words. "To everyone who has supported me through the good times and the bad, thank you. To my daughter, I'm sorry for the pain my choices have caused you. I promise to do better. And to the man who discovered me, who shaped me, who loved me like a father. Clive, if you're listening, I know you're disappointed in me right now. I know you think I'm throwing everything away, but you taught me to be brave. You taught me to trust my instincts. And my instincts are telling me that the only way forward is through honesty, even when it's terrifying." The camera immediately cut to Clive Davis backstage. He was standing completely still, tears running down his face, his expression a mixture of heartbreak and something that looked like understanding. Whitney picked up her Grammy and walked off the stage to a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. But it wasn't the cheering kind of standing ovation. It was the stunned, emotional, "we just witnessed something profound" kind of standing ovation. 15,000 people were on their feet, many of them crying, all of them trying to process what had just happened. The moment Whitney returned backstage, she was surrounded by people. Assistants, producers, fellow artists. Everyone wanted to talk to her to ask if she was okay, to process what had just happened. But Whitney only had eyes for one person. Clive Davis was standing at the end of the hallway alone, watching her approach. When she reached him, they stood there for a long moment, neither speaking. Finally, Clive broke the silence. "You did it. You actually did it." Whitney nodded. "I had to, Clive. I'm sorry." Clive's face was a mask of conflicting emotions. Pain, anger, love, disappointment, understanding, all fighting for dominance. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? The media is going to crucify you. Every tabloid, every talk show, every critic is going to tear apart every word you said. Your sponsors might drop you. Radio stations might stop playing your music. You just committed career suicide on live television." Whitney's voice was quiet but steady. "Maybe, but I also just saved my life, Clive. Because if I had walked up there and given another perfect, polished, fake speech, I would have died inside. And I'd rather risk my career than lose my soul." Clive looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was acceptance. Acceptance that the Whitney Houston he had created no longer existed. That the girl who had trusted him completely had grown into a woman who was choosing her own path, even if he believed that path led to destruction. "I can't protect you from this, Whitney. I can't spin this or fix this or make it go away. You've just shown the world your vulnerable, broken self, and they're going to use it against you." Whitney reached out to touch his arm, but Clive stepped back. The gesture was small, but it felt like a canyon opening up between them. "I know you can't fix this," Whitney said, "and I'm not asking you to. For the first time in 17 years, I'm asking you to just let me be. Let me figure this out on my own." Clive's voice was thick with emotion when he finally responded. "I don't know if I can do that, Whitney. My entire relationship with you has been about guidance and protection. If you don't want that anymore, I don't know what role I'm supposed to play in your life." The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the unsaid words, all the years of history, all the love and frustration and disappointment. "Maybe we both need some space," Whitney finally said. Maybe we've been too close for too long and we've forgotten where you end and I begin. Clive nodded slowly. Space, is that what you want? I think it's what we both need, Whitney replied. Clive looked at her one final time, his eyes memorizing every detail of her face as if he was saying goodbye. I hope you're right, Whitney. I hope that speech was worth it. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. But I also hope you understand that things between us will never be the same after tonight. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the now quiet hallway. Whitney watched him go, and for the first time in years, she felt something unexpected. Relief and terror, because she had just lost the man who had been her anchor, her guide, her protector for 17 years. And she had no idea if she was strong enough to navigate the storm that was coming without him. The media reaction to Whitney's Grammy speech was exactly what Clive had predicted. Within hours, headlines screamed Whitney Houston's marriage crisis and the speech that ended Whitney's career. Talk shows dissected every word. Some praised her honesty, but industry insiders were less forgiving. Within a week, 3 major sponsors quietly ended their contracts. Radio stations decreased playlist rotation. Concert venues became unavailable. Through it all, Clive Davis said nothing publicly. That silence was louder than any words could have been. For Whitney, the weeks following the Grammys were the most difficult of her professional life. Industry people who had once courted her now seemed distant. Meetings were canceled. Calls went unreturned. And worst of all, Clive stopped reaching out. No phone calls, no messages, no fatherly check-ins. The silence between them stretched from days to weeks to months. Whitney wanted to call him 100 times but couldn't. What would she even say? Clive, for his part, seemed lost. He would talk about Whitney constantly, alternating between anger and grief. I gave her everything, he told a close friend, and she threw it all away for one moment of honesty. But late at night, he would admit maybe he had been wrong. I treated her like a creation instead of a person, he confessed to his son. And now I've lost her because I couldn't accept that the creation wanted to become her own woman. 18 months passed. Whitney's career didn't collapse completely, but it never fully recovered. Her next album sold moderately. Concert tours were smaller. And through it all, she carried the weight of Clive's absence like a wound that wouldn't heal. In September 2002, Whitney checked herself into a rehabilitation facility for drug treatment. This would finally break the silence. Clive heard about Whitney's rehab admission from a mutual friend. The news hit him like a physical blow. Despite their estrangement, he had never stopped caring. Without thinking, Clive drove to the Connecticut rehabilitation facility. When he arrived at the gate, he gave his name to security, not knowing if Whitney had put him on the approved visitor list. She had. A counselor led him to a small room with windows overlooking gardens. Before he could settle on what to say, the door opened and Whitney walked in. She looked different, thinner, tired. But there was something in her eyes Clive hadn't seen in years. Clarity, peace, maybe even hope. You came, Whitney said softly. Clive stood up, his throat tight with emotion. Of course I came. Did you really think I wouldn't? Whitney's eyes filled with tears. After everything that happened, I thought maybe you had finally given up on me. Clive crossed the room and pulled Whitney into a hug. They both cried. All the anger, all the hurt, all the stubborn pride that had kept them apart for 18 months dissolved in that embrace. I'm so sorry, Whitney sobbed. Clive held her tighter. No, I'm sorry, you were right, Whitney. That night at the Grammys, you were right and I was wrong. I was so focused on protecting your image that I forgot about protecting you, the real you. They sat down together, still holding hands, and for the first time in 18 months, they really talked. That speech you gave, Clive said quietly, I called it career suicide, and in some ways I was right. It did damage your career, but you know what? It also saved your life, so I was wrong to try to stop you. I was wrong to put your career ahead of your humanity. Whitney squeezed his hand. The backlash was brutal, but I knew I could never go back to living a lie, even if it cost me everything. Before Clive left, he made Whitney a promise. When you're ready to make music again, I'll be here. Not to control you or shape you into something you're not, but to support you in becoming whoever you want to be. Whitney smiled through her tears. The Whitney who walks out of this place won't be perfect. She won't always follow your advice. Clive smiled back. Good, Because the Whitney I discovered was never really perfect either. She was just good at pretending. So let's both try being real for a change. Whitney Houston never fully recovered the commercial heights she had reached in the 1980s and early 1990s. Her 2000 Grammy speech became part of music history. Some called it brave, some called it reckless, but everyone agreed it was real. And in an industry built on carefully managed personas, that realness was revolutionary. Whitney and Clive rebuilt their relationship slowly over the years. They worked together again, but the dynamic had changed. Clive learned to offer guidance without demanding control. Whitney learned to accept help without surrendering her autonomy. When Whitney Houston died in 2012, Clive Davis was devastated. At her funeral, he spoke about their complicated, beautiful relationship. "Whitney taught me something that night in 2000, Clive said, his voice breaking. She taught me that the greatest gift an artist can give the world isn't perfection, it's truth. And though it cost her dearly, she never regretted speaking her truth that night. And neither do I." Whitney Houston's 2000 Grammy speech didn't end her career. It didn't fix her marriage or cure her addiction. But it did something more important. It gave her back her humanity. It freed her from the prison of perfection. And it showed the world that even superstars belong to human beings who hurt and struggle and need permission to be imperfect. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and ring that bell because we have more stories that show the real human beings behind the legends. Until next time, remember, you don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love. You just have to be real. And sometimes, being real is the bravest thing you can do.